Hello and welcome to Aging Well with 50Forward and Dr. Amy Price Neff from Mindstream Integrative Medicine. My name is Kelsey Mahaffey, and I'm the All of Us Project Director for 50Forward, located in Nashville, Tennessee. Today's program is brought to you by 50Forward, which is a national community engagement partner for the All of Us Research Program. All of Us is a research program from the National Institutes of Health seeking to advance precision medicine. All of Us is looking for 1 million people from diverse backgrounds living in the United States to volunteer and share their health information, helping researchers find better treatments and cures for all of us. Over 750,000 have enrolled so far, with 80% of those coming from underrepresented communities. You can learn more and even join them by visiting our website at joinallofus.org/50forward. With me also today is the lovely Dr. Amy Price Neff, as well as my colleague Keith Richardson, who will introduce today's topic and special guest. Welcome, Dr. Neff, and hello, Keith.
Hi, Kelsey, and a big hello and welcome to Dr. Neff, as well as all of you watching today. Today's topic is important, and we're going to be talking about preventing memory loss as we age. According to the Alzheimer's Association, in 2023, an estimated 6.7 million Americans aged 65 and older were living with Alzheimer's dementia, which means about 1 in 9 people 65 and older has the disease. Let's learn more as we dive into this topic with our favorite guest, Dr. Amy Price Neff, who has put together a presentation to share. For those watching on Facebook, please place any questions in the comments section on the screen, and we will do our best to answer those at the end. Dr. Neff, welcome back, and as always, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Keith, it's so good to see you, and thank you
Good to
for
see you
that
too.
sweet introduction.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and Kelsey. Yeah, love being here, love being back, and I love talking about preventing dementia, right? So, what an important thing. Um, if any of you out there have lost or are currently living with a friend or family member that has dementia, I think about it as one of the cruelest of the chronic illnesses that we face because it takes the mind before it takes the body, or often taking the body simultaneously. And what ends up being left is a person that is not the same as the person that we knew. And this can really cause fairly intense strain, in caregiver burnout. Sadly, our system just isn't quite equipped to provide the kind of dementia care that we would all hope for. Because it's hard. It's hard, and often people need constant round the clock care. And there's very few resources for respite for people. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Nice. Full. I just apologize on the front end. People are going to see my messy, my messy desktop. But that's okay. It's okay. Nobody judge, please. Let's get this up here. So, what we're going to talk about here is living. How can I do that? Maybe that. Okay. Living in the body to preserve the mind. Let's talk a little bit first before we get going about what preventive neurology is. So this is a relatively new field, and it's looking at ways to avoid developing chronic and/or incurable neurological diseases. And while we're going to talk today about dementia, there are other neurological disorders that preventive neurology seeks to address. And those can include things like stroke and multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, Parkinson's, migraine, and neurodevelopmental disorders like autism spectrum disorders. So I just want to kind of like pique your interest in this. And then as we kind of dive into dementia, we can if you have concerns or questions about any of those other things, although I'm no expert in preventive neurology, prevention as a general kind of attitude is something that I feel really strongly about. And, it's always better basically to prevent things than it is to try and cure them. So let's talk a little bit about what dementia is and what the types of dementia are. So, first of all, dementia just as a disorder is the hallmark is progressive memory loss. And with progressive memory loss, there come other changes as well. And we don't typically do like a blood test to diagnose dementia. And so these are things that show up insidiously. They are subtle. And there are things that happen to all of us as we get older. It certainly happened to me that like ready access to a memory, a word, putting a name with a face, things like that can become a little bit more challenged. And there are a variety of things that can affect that. And of course, anybody as we get older that starts to have a little bit of an issue with finding a word can develop that fear, of, am I getting dementia? So let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of dementia. The most common type is called Alzheimer's dementia. And it basically affects both mind and body, memory, thinking skills, personality, mood. When I'm working with people with Alzheimer's, what we notice is it's like they're at a plateau of function, and then suddenly there's a shift, and that plateau kind of drops down a little bit. So maybe at first, like still able to drive, and then suddenly starts getting lost when they go out. And so then we have to, kind of like curtail driving. So the hallmark of this disorder is the development of a type of protein deposit in the brain, but also found in the gut of something called beta amyloid and tau. And so these are very interesting areas of clinical research. And I don't know the specifics, but it's also true that some research that identified beta amyloid deposits as the hallmark of Alzheimer's and the pathophysiological problem, it's actually been debunked a little bit. So, the bottom line is like we don't understand it well, but it is a disorder where you can find these pathophysiological changes, but we don't know if it's a chicken or an egg thing. So the next type of dementia, called Lewy body dementia, comes in two types. And the way that this gets differentiated from Alzheimer's is really two ways. One is that they don't have the beta amyloid plaques, typically in Lewy body dementia, although there can be some overlap. It's more this thing called alpha-synuclein. And, hopefully as we come to understand these protein deposits, we get a little bit better idea of like what's happening and why. But dementia with Lewy body is also typified by visual hallucinations and fluctuations in attention and alertness. And so that's a little bit different from Alzheimer's type dementia. And then the same protein deposits are also found in Parkinson's disease dementia. So patients with Parkinson's who've had the Parkinson's symptoms for a long time tend to develop dementia. And the Lewy body effects have, in addition to the memory loss, they also have an effect on people's blood pressure and something called basically postural blood pressure regulation issues, where these patients are more at risk for like collapse and passing out. So again, just a kind of a different type of syndrome. And then very interestingly, people in younger years that have something called REM sleep disorder often, and I think the statistics at this point are like 80% of them go on to develop this type of dementia and or Parkinson's disease. And then the final kind of dementia that we're going to talk about today is vascular dementia. So these are patients that develop memory loss, mood changes, difficulty with, moving their body, gait, but they don't have the protein plaque buildup. And again, this is also something that can overlap with other kinds of dementia. So the first thing that we want to do in order to prevent something is start to ask ourselves questions that might give us clues about areas that we can work deeper into. So is there a family history of dementia? Does a parent, grandparent, or sibling have dementia? That can be a clue to some of the genetic changes associated with dementia. Next, as far as personal health history, does one have high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, sleep apnea, obesity, mood disorders, thyroid conditions? We'll talk a little bit more about medication use in a minute, but then also sensory loss. Is there changes in hearing, changes in vision, loss of smell or taste, or this REM sleep disorder? And then finally, just kind of a big category is something called the expososome. Basically, all the things you're exposed to. You're exposed to food, you're exposed to how you move your body and exercise habits, or, work in a position that requires prolonged sitting. Sleep can be affected by work schedules. It can be affected by disorders like sleep apnea. It can be affected by sleep environment, like depending on where you live and if there's like lots of exterior noise or chronic light pollution in your sleep environment. Many things can affect your sleep quality. Chronic stress, I spelled that wrong, but chronic stress is a problem. And then, tension in relationships, another form of stress. Tobacco use, alcohol use, chronic chemical exposures, and then exposures to diesel fuel and things like, gasoline and things like that. Let's see. And then more questions to ask. So, with greater frequency now, because, in traditional medical practices, the formula always seemed to be like, come in with a symptom and we're going to listen to that story, and then we're going to prescribe a medication to treat the symptom. And so as we've kind of matured in our practices, we understand that medicines aren't necessarily harmless. Okay. And so when we talk about medication use and dementia risk, one of the things that comes up, if I can just highlight this, so there are antihistamines that are sold over the counter, which when used for decades, can actually increase a person's risk for dementia. The scopolamine, that's the Dramamine that you can take if you get, travel-related dizziness and nausea. Hydroxyzine, a common medication used to treat anxiety. The bottom line is, we as clinicians and then patients have to come to a deeper understanding of the relationship between medication use and risks for, problems down the road. Benzodiazepines are a class of medication often used to treat anxiety and insomnia. And while probably it's safe in the short term, we wouldn't want to use these medications long term. And, these are medications that when you take them, they just like drop your anxiety down. They're very effective at doing that, but they kind of like are an off switch for the function of the mind, right? And you can think about anxiety being kind of like mental, activity, energy really high, arousal high, and you just dim the lights there. And so in the short term, that feels good. But in the long term, dimming the lights, right? It just decreases the stimulus that our body gets through our senses. And at the end of the day, consciousness, cognitive function, is a product of how the sensory systems get nourished, right? So whether it's food or, a beautiful environment versus a not so beautiful environment, there are just so many ways that you can start to think about sensory input as being vital to sustaining the function of the mind. So similarly, antipsychotic medications, treating disorders that have hallucinations and delusions and agitation, again, can also be associated with the development of dementia. So can the conditions themselves, right? So what you're not hearing from me is saying, hey, don't ever take these medicines. It's more like, let's have a robust conversation about the trade-offs, the risks, and the benefits, so that someone's never broadsided by the use of a medication and then develop cognitive impairment and feel like they didn't know that that was a risk. Proton pump inhibitors, somewhat controversial. The evidence is mixed, but what we do know that these medicines do, like Nexium, Prilosec, and the generic names pantoprazole and omeprazole, what we do know that they do is they impair the absorption of lots of different nutritional factors. And as you'll see in a couple of slides, what you eat has a tremendous impact on the flourishing of the mind. And then finally, opioid pain medications, oxycodone, codeine, Vicodin, Lortab, things like that, definitely associated with cognitive impairment. So is chronic pain. And again, if you think about when you're burdened by a sensory experience of chronic pain, you're a little less attuned to the environment around you. So when you're at your doctor's office, one of the things that you can do is you can start to kind of take maybe a little deeper awareness of what these numbers are that the doctor is collecting. Like, what's your blood pressure? The goal is to have good blood pressure, not only to prevent heart disease, but higher blood pressures, even in midlife with no other illness around them, are associated with an increased risk of dementia. And by controlling that blood pressure, even with a medication, you lower your risk. What is a waist to hip ratio? So basically, around the midsection is your waist, and around kind of like your upper legs is your hips. And what we want to see is a smaller waist than hip. And when your waist and you start to gain weight in your midsection, what that's telling us is that your metabolism is not working quite as robustly, and you're depositing energy in the midsection, which, so if it's obesity, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, these are all things that effectively tell us that your energy production and storage system is not working optimally. As you get older, if you start to lose muscle, this is associated with a variety of increases in risk. And you can think fundamentally, it's like if you're moving less, losing muscle, you're just not as vital and out there. So all of you guys who come with me to walk with a doc, we're out there, charging, and I say it over and over again, that this movement in nature, bringing this sensory experience into the body mind, is what keeps us alive and vibrant, especially when we do it together. VO2 testing. So this is kind of it's an old trick that I think is increasingly used clinically to help us understand how good your body is at taking oxygen from the air and converting it into energy. And basically, as that gets worse and worse with age and loss of movement and muscle mass loss, you're at increased risk for dementia. And then we've talked about it before, but I'll repeat it. When your senses start to decline, hearing, vision, smell, taste, you're just not nourishing your mind quite as well. And so, big thing here, like if I, as a 52-year-old, started to think about needing to get hearing aids, I might have some ego issues that would make me feel like I don't want to do that. But what I have learned about dementia prevention is that the sooner I understand I have hearing loss and just am willing to go ahead and correct it, the lower my risk will be. See, I need to get glasses that allow me to see up close, so I don't have to do this all the time. And I'm thinking about taking care of myself in a way that, yes, I'm going to go get my glasses updated so that I am keeping my good sensory input through my eyes. So moving along to what kind of tests can we get, again, to understand how we need to prevent dementia? There, before we get to ApoE, just talking about blood sugar. So if you have type 2 diabetes, this is something that basically indicates that your cells don't quite have access to energy that is keeping them alive and vibrant. So we want to have good metabolic flexibility. And that's going to happen by not developing diabetes, but if you have, to kind of do the things that help improve your metabolic flexibility. Higher triglycerides are just simply another way of looking at this metabolic dysfunction that's associated with high blood sugar. And oxidized LDL is basically a type of fat in the body that's a little bit rusty. And so you can imagine, like in a rusty machine, that the parts don't move quite as well. And when the system in the human body starts to get a little bit rusty with more of these oxidized substances, things just don't work as well. So going back here to ApoE testing, this is a type of lipid protein that allows your body to transport certain fats. And there are different versions of this gene, E2, E3, and E4. And people who get copies of the E4 gene are at greater risk for dementia, as long as they continue to live a lifestyle that is fairly typical in America. Highly processed foods, little movement, alcohol use, lots of saturated fat. Those are things that for people with the ApoE4 gene, if they are willing to shift out of those behaviors and exposures and into more exercise, a healthier diet, they can really transform their risk. So I like to think about that as those genes were not, you didn't inherit those because they were bad for you. Those were genes that served a purpose in a different environment. And you know, humans have not lived in our current environmental state for very long, and a lot of us don't tolerate it well. These last two things, the tau PET or tau positron emission tomography, this is really more of an experimental treatment. They actually have done several studies here at Vanderbilt in Nashville using this tool to detect Alzheimer's early, you know, but what I'm talking about you today is hopefully geared towards never getting dementia in the first place. And then MRI also used to differentiate different types of cognitive impairment. So when we talk about prevention, now that we've kind of gotten a baseline of like, what is dementia, what are the types, and what are the clues that you need to be looking for in your own history, now we want to go into like the foundation of prevention. And that foundation is really what you eat, how you move, how you're sleeping, and who you're connected to. So love, you know, signified by that heart in the middle, like who are your people? And so getting into diet, a lot of people will come to me and ask about supplements in, you know, in their health journey. And I have no problem with supplements, and in fact, often prescribe them. But what I want you to notice here is that within the Mediterranean diet, the supplements, you know, of course you can take them, but none of those supplements is actually going to make up for the effects of your food, the wisdom beyond our level of understanding that comes to us through our diets. And, you know, with the Mediterranean diet, the wedge here of the grain things in this image is probably a little too big. You need to have like 2/3 of the pie with like fruits and vegetables, and then, you know, grains, meats, dairy, cheeses, things like that are really good for you. But as you can see, all these words, polyphenols, triterpenoids, all that means is just like the living wisdom of foods. Same thing with anthocyanin, apigenin, miracetin, quercetin, all substances found in foods. Omega-3 found in both fish and in vegetables. B vitamins, folate, B12, all found in things like nutritional yeast and eggs and meat. GABA, DHA, these, we'll talk a little bit more about these things, but these are cognitive enhancers. They're antioxidants and anti-inflammatories, you know, and they help our bodies to detoxify from substances that we're exposed to. So I want to make a few evidence-based suggestions if you did want to take some supplements. So probably the two most effective are vitamin D and phosphatidylserine. I would say that those have the most potential impact. So vitamin D, as a mammal, this is a substance that we get from foods, and when we are exposed to sunlight, that vitamin D transforms into something. And we now know that in addition to bone health, vitamin D is involved in the regulation of mood and inflammation and just pretty much every system of the body. Phosphatidylserine is a type of fat that's found in cell membranes, and you can think about it as basically just kind of like a tool that helps to improve the resilience of cell walls. And in elderly patients that did not have dementia, when they were given phosphatidylserine 100 milligrams at different doses, once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, those patients improved and maintained the improvements on tests of memory. And they actually did a very, very good job. GABA is something that has been used to treat anxiety and sleep disorders. I would say that the data on that are mixed, so probably not the place to go for first. Omega-3 fats, they have evidence for use in so many different conditions now, mental health conditions, cardiovascular conditions. And while the studies that I looked at said that the evidence was stronger for actual fish consumption rather than omega-3 fat supplement consumption, I think it's safe to say, especially if you're already taking it, keep taking it. N-acetylcysteine is something that helps your body detoxify. So when we looked at that dietary picture, you saw a lot of things that were like anti-inflammatory and inflammation reducer and antioxidants, and N-acetylcysteine is going to contribute to that. So has some moderately good evidence. And then finally, just some very interesting results for melatonin use in Parkinson's and Parkinson's dementia. So if you have Parkinson's now and want to avoid the development of dementia, might be something worth bringing up with your clinician. I don't know why some of my pictures didn't come in. Anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit about sauna and cold plunge. So if sauna were a drug, we would all be on it. Some of the studies now have shown a 60% reduction in mortality from heart disease. And for dementia, it looks like about a 50% reduction. So if that is something that appeals to you, if you go to a gym where there's a sauna, the dose is about 20 minutes, 4 times a week. There was a Finnish study that looked at people having at least 9 sessions a month. And again, it was about a 50% reduction in the risk of dementia. But these are all the other conditions, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, mood disorders, and chronic pain that have some evidence to support the use of sauna in there. So, and then finally, let's talk a little bit about social connection, which is this love part of reducing your risk for dementia. When you think about like taking in these images, what you notice is that people are moving. There's color, there's touch. This is a feast for the senses, and we as humans really need the hive. I always say to patients, it's hard to be in connection and in community, but it's even harder to be outside of that. So I just want to underscore, the necessity really of connecting with people, to feed and water and nourish yourself. And if you find it hard to connect with people, even just going and doing things that we would call parallel play, like for instance, with the sauna, although the data for sauna use are really robust, in several of the clinical trials, what they talk about is that in Finland, for instance, where they have a traditional sauna practice, sauna isn't just the heat, it's also the social connection of it. These are like community-based saunas. And so, can you find that community connection where you feel comfortable going, even if you don't want to talk to people. You know, as our society gets more technologically advanced, we're starting to lose all of that incidental contact that is so meaningful. The bank teller, the grocery store checker, you know, these are people that whose roles don't exist anymore in our society. Yeah, so that's my presentation. I'm excited to hear from any of you if you have any questions at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Amy. Oh my gosh, such fabulous information. I have never heard of the sauna. That's news to me.
Right.
What
Well,
what about that is working? Is it just I mean, the social connection? I heard you say that, but is it sweating out toxins? Is that what it is?
so that can be a part of it. There's also a really interesting part of our system that generates something called a heat shock protein. Okay, and
Wow.
heat shock proteins, as they sound like, you know, when you get into a hot environment, they're gonna like turn on. And you can think about a heat shock protein is basically the cellular decider, like separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Who
Mhm.
can function, which of you cellular components are working good, and who needs to get out, you know, because you're just underperforming. It's really like a culling process that happens. And the
Mhm.
data are also good for these heat shock proteins, you know, so sauna experiences for people with cancer, you know, or preventing cancer. That didn't even make it on my list, but it's true. Um, so yeah, I can't really say enough about sauna. And you know, here in the Nashville area, it's a business that's like really starting to kind of grow. You might notice different sauna programs here in Berry Hill. A place called Framework just opened about a month ago. And I'm eagerly prescribing sauna to my patients, that dose of 4 times a week for at least 20 minutes. And hopefully in a social space, right, where you can feel socially connected, because the data is so good, and we don't want to have to take a pill, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you put that in your presentation, Dr. Neff, because I use the sauna and
Mhm.
it definitely helps me out a whole lot as far as like when I work out sometimes or if I'm jogging or running,
Mhm.
because, you know, it's just that muscle recovery too is so important and letting that blood flow and circulate.
Mhm.
It's just something about the heat. So I could stay in there longer than 20 minutes. It's not good, but yeah.
Well, you know, honestly, Keith, I think everybody's a little bit different in terms of what they can tolerate, right? So, you know, I'm one of those people that can sit in a sauna for an hour, and it's like my vata nature. I need heat and
Mhm.
moisture. And my husband can be in there for about 10 minutes and he's like, you know, just
Sweat,
pouring
yeah.
red in the face. And so, you know, I think you got to listen to your body, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Um, and and then also enjoy it, right?
Hmm.
Um, one of the things I'll do with the sauna is, let's say I'm feeling kind of down in the dumps and I'm like, I've planned a workout and I just like don't have it, you know, but I can talk myself into the sauna.
Yeah.
And and
Mm-hmm.
it physiologically is a lot like a workout. So some of those same endorphin releases and kind of like blood flow things that would happen to you as a result of a workout can happen in the sauna.
Hmm.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. I'm gonna have to find a sauna now, prevention of memory loss. That's just so exciting. So as we're waiting, any of you watching live on Facebook, if you have a question for Dr. Price Neff about memory loss, or if you have a question for us about the All of Us Research Program, go ahead and drop those now into the comment section on Facebook. And while we're waiting to see if we do have any questions, we'll talk briefly about the prescription prevention. That's what I was trying to say for walk with a doc, which walking, is there anything it's not good for? It sounds like sauna. So we do have our monthly walk with a doc coming up, and that's going to be Wednesday, March 13th. And that will be at 10 a.m. at Centennial Park here in Nashville. So if you're in the Nashville area, please consider joining us for that. And Dr. Amy Price Neff will be there for that walk as well. So I have a couple questions while we're waiting to you, Keith, but do you have some other than sauna?
Not a question, but I want to say something in regards to the presentation. My grandmother, she just turned 90 years old. So amazing. And she's still like in her right mind. She still can think and do things for herself. She even cooks. And it blows my mind like how the mind still works at that age.
Mhm.
But excuse me, but another thing that she does that really helps her is she does puzzles. And
Mhm.
it really helps as far as like memory and putting things together. And she also does crossword puzzles. She'll get the Sunday paper and she'll just do the whole thing. And she said it really helps her stay focused. And even though it's not much to a lot of people, putting little puzzles together, doing crossword puzzles, it keeps her mind active. So I think that's another important thing.
Oh, I love that you said that, Keith. I didn't include that in my talk, but it's so true. And it's simple, right?
Hmm.
And and I think about that as a way to feed and nourish the like nourish the mind, right?
Hmm.
When you're asking yourself, like in the working of a puzzle, to solve a problem, you know, think about that is kind of an experience of the mind versus just sitting there passively and watching a TV, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Different
And it's
experience.
it's like a brain exercise, you know?
Yeah, it's like
Mhm.
your little brain going, wait. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Great that you mentioned that. We've got a lot of people that work puzzles in our 50 Forward Center, so I'm sure that mind building is great.
Yeah.
So we're still waiting. We've got a few viewers, but no questions so far. So I'm going to ask one more of mine, and then if we have no more questions, we'll wrap up. But you did mention genetics,
Mm.
talking about dementia and family history. And I was just curious if you have a pulse or any idea, what do you feel? How close are researchers to discovering specific genes that might cause dementia or Alzheimer's?
I think at this point, there's several things that are clearly associated, like that ApoE4, and anybody that sees a regular traditional physician can ask for that test. Okay, so that's a genetic test.
Wow.
And then there are several others kind of like in a matrix, that are being studied. And most of these have to do with things like fat metabolism in the body. If you think about the actual nervous system tissues, and the part that's so interesting to me is, they're increasingly making a connection between the gut and the brain, right? And so what's clear in Alzheimer's is that those beta amyloid plaques actually form first in the gut. And, they can actually travel up the vagus nerve, right? So if we're thinking about like, root cause stuff, it's largely, I mean, I'm not a betting person, but if I were, it would be to say like, we're probably going to find the bulk of this exacerbation, through gut inflammation. And we're eating different food. And it's not to say that the food industry has been trying to kill us all or make us all demented. It's that, you know, we didn't understand what we were doing at the time. Like, who cooks with Crisco anymore? Nobody, but as a 52-year-old, I can tell you that that was the dominant cooking fat in the household that I grew up in.
Mhm.
And, when it was invented in the 1920s or 30s, it was like an incredible gift, right? To, with population growth, and the expense of things like butter, that people could have had ready access to a cheap industrial product, that everybody thought was harmless. I would say that currently the same analogy applies to like what we have traditionally done with medications that we thought were harmless, giving people Benadryl, giving people a Xanax, just like thinking that putting a Band-Aid on that acute problem was a harmless thing. And I think we can say safely now it's not.
Yeah, so true.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I don't think we have any more questions, so we will probably wrap up. Keith, I'll close it out right here.
Okay.
So, Dr. Neff, this is a thank you from Keith and I both, once again, for putting together such a wonderful presentation. We do hope our viewers out there have learned something as well. And we want to end today's program by looking to the future. So again, according to the Alzheimer's Association, we wanted to mention that by the year 2060, the number of people aged 65 and older living with Alzheimer's dementia is projected to reach 13.8 million, barring the development of medical breakthroughs to prevent, slow, or cure the disease. So the All of Us research program, this was created to help researchers, studying this disease, studying dementia, as well as so many other diseases that affect us all. Currently, there are over 9,000 research projects using the All of Us data, with over 100 of those looking at dementia and Alzheimer's. So that's exciting news. There's current research happening right now within the All of Us research program. So if you'd like to learn more about All of Us and how you can join and help leave a legacy for future generations, please consider visiting our website at joinallofus.org/50forward. We're going to close with a short PSA about the program today. And thank you to everyone tuning in, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks.
All across the country, people are coming together to speed up what we can learn about health. The All of Us research program is calling on 1 million people to join us as we try to change the future of health. For your family, for future generations, for all of us. Visit joinallofus.org and find out how you can become 1 in a million.